This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to Art at Noon, Part 3. And if you have not muted your microphone, if you would do that now, I would so appreciate it, because this is modern day technology and we do get that reverb back and forth. Okay, my friends, you have been on this journey with me. Part 1 of stained glass, where we talked about stained glass and the importance of it and how it was developed and how it started. And we looked at lots of pictures, talked about things that were real important in the making of stained glass, where it was made. And then we started segued into the cathedral construction and why it was so important in the building of these beautiful Gothic cathedrals. Today, that was the first part. The second part was I gave you information about famous glassmakers, and we did Comfy, Lafarge, England, and how they absolutely put this stained glass together to formulate these beautiful windows that populate our church and churches around the world. And not only just do we look at churches and artists, for example, Monet, who did a very contemporary stained glass window churches, and we looked at some of those. So today it's culminating into our cathedral and the stained glass windows that are there. I'm going to start with just an overview, a Gothic overview, because I really feel like I need to set the tone again, because it's been several months. So we'll look first at Gothic architecture, and we'll talk specifically about a specific Gothic architecture, which is Tudor, which is what our church is, sort of, kind of, but we're going to say it is. And then we'll just take a walk through the church and look at the windows and discuss colors and shapes and what was behind maybe the design of the windows and what we can get out of. The whole goal for me is for you, when you sit in the church on Sunday morning or Easter Sunday or any time that we're in the church, that you become acquainted with the stories, that you become acquainted with the people, and you become acquainted with perhaps some of the designs. And that's going to enrich your experience in that church, in our church. I guarantee it. I really guarantee it. It will, honestly. So let's begin. Okay. In the Middle Ages, let me see. I'm going to do something here. All right, I'm ready now. In the Middle Ages, the European stained glass windows reached their zenith in what is known as Gothic architecture. Some scholars say that Gothic architecture created the Middle Ages. Maybe so. As stated by a stained glass wordsmith of old, and I hope you can see this. Let me move this up in case you can't. So let's go back. It's hard to grab these things. The stained glass windows, they enriched the mind and inspired the soul and pointed the way to heaven to those who gazed upon these glass. The Gothic period started at the beginning of the 12th century, in 1128 to be precise, when 9 knights came back from Jerusalem after spending 10 years in the Temple of Solomon. They were the first Knights Templar from the Temple of Solomon. From that moment, in France, all over Europe, Gothic cathedrals and churches started to spring up like mushrooms. Many historians and architects think that the Gothic was the evolution of the Romanesque style. And in a way it was. But both those styles were being used simultaneously. Sometimes we think, oh, there was a Romanesque period and there was a Gothic period. There wasn't. They were both coming together simultaneously during the 12th and the 13th centuries, as they were the work of two completely different guilds. So, how is it that such magnificent buildings, the size of a stadium in some cases, started to just appear out of nowhere with a technology that had never been seen before in Europe? Who were these builders and what did they intend to achieve through these cathedrals? As we said, the Gothic style first appeared in the 1100s in an area around Paris. In architecture, Gothic buildings employed a variety of new techniques to pierce the walls with larger windows, known as stained glass windows, and to build loftier spaces. In sculpture and other figurative arts, the style combined the detailed observation of nature with an expressive elegance. Gothic quickly spread throughout Europe, and versions of this style were still in place in the 1500s. This is Saint Denis. And if you remember, some of you may, we discussed Saint Denis at length in a former presentation. It was the world's first monumental masterpiece of Gothic art. Work began on the main building in 1122. There was a church there before. This is a royal burial place. It holds the tombs, just for an aside. This is the librarian in me. I have to give you these little extras. It holds or houses the tombs of 75 French kings and queens and 63 princes and princesses throughout the centuries. The Gothic style was not really understood, but it should be understood as art. But most people think of it more as a tool of transmutation. This was the meaning, really, of the early Gothic, also known as true Gothic. But by the end of the 13th century, the Gothic had lost its purpose and had just become an art form, however beautiful it still was. Now, there are three elements. When you think of a Gothic cathedral, there are three elements that you look at. You look at the place, you look at the orientation, and the proportions of the dimension. The places were carefully chosen. A lot of times they were sites of sacred temples, even Roman temples, and on sacred ground in the Celtic culture. We can say that the cathedral was placed strategically and carefully on the earth, as a Chinese doctor would carefully place a needle for acupuncture. This is how they were really chosen that way. It was built in an area of consecrated earth, and they felt like the forces, even they still kind of held to those forces when they were building, of those earth forces. The Cathedral of Chartres, for example, is built on ancient ground with an ancient dolmen built beneath it. Now, the orientation is the next key in the building of the cathedral. And it was linked to the course of the sun at a particular time of the year, usually the winter solstice, as this is the moment when the earth seems to stand still and everything begins again. The proportions of the cathedral, another important factor, was inspired by nature because the monument is built to channel forces. The cathedral is like a musical instrument, but it's tuned to vibrate at a spiritual frequency. I just love that. I found that in a writing of the Vessel of Light, the Gothic cathedral. The architect used mathematics through geometry to build every inch of this creation, leaving nothing to chance or negligence. The final but not least important element of the Gothic cathedral, of course, is the stained glass. In the true Gothic style, this is the only form of art inside the cathedral. But this glass is more than art. It's a catalyst. As we know today, sunlight can be destructive with all the UV rays. So stained glass filters the light to create kind of alchemical cave by bringing back to life natural principles to teach and transform others. Gothic architecture, as said, originated in France, became widely popular through Europe. Most of the churches were Romanesque, and they were really thick, had really thick arches and walls and small windows. Gothic architecture revolutionized that design by allowing these cathedrals to be taller and filled with rainbows of light. This is the inside of the National Cathedral, and it's the sixth largest cathedral in the world and was built in the 14th century. And the first bishop of Washington, Satterlees, decreed that Gothic was God's preferred architectural style. Most Gothic churches are built facing west in the shape of a cross. The central part of the cathedral is called the nave. The two arms of the cross are called transepts, and the head of the cross is called the apse. The oldest stained glass windows still in existence today originated roughly around 1000 AD and dwell in this Roman Catholic cathedral of Augsburg, Germany. Because of the infancy of the written word in the Dark Ages, the concept of making pictures from colored glass was founded around the 7th century, way before the stained glass cathedrals. Here, a multimillennium later, it is agreed that architecture, art, and religion were unified in this stained glass of European Gothic. The development of stained glass in the Gothic church was well authenticated by the resident abbot Serge of the Abbey of St. Denis in Paris. Abbot Serge was a childhood chum of the later to be named monarch, King Louis VI of France. Serge says that, and this was a quote from Serge, pictures in the windows are there for the purpose of showing simple people who cannot read the Holy Scriptures, which is what they must believe. Now we're going to jump forward to the Gothic revival. And our church is considered to be Tudor architecture or a Gothic Tudor church. And it blends architectural elements with the Gothic cathedral. Gothic architecture is vertically. Gothic cathedrals often emphasize height. They've got pointed arches. They have ribbed vaults and flying buttresses that allow you to have taller structures. They have elaborate tracery, especially around the windows. Windows are in there, and the windows are often really decorated with intricate tracery. And stained glass was a common feature. They have ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, and these external supports allow thinner walls and larger windows. Now, the Tudor style blended with the Gothic style. They too have pointed arches and multi-pane glass windows, but they also add things like timbered beams, steeply pitched roofs, and they have practical considerations as well. They are brick and stone. They can feature elements that are extremely Gothic, as well as combine elements that are extremely Tudor. As is an example is our church, which you can see if you will look at the example. This is the cathedral that is Gothic in design. You can see from our church has similar designs, but you notice also that our church picks up the designs that are relatively in these two English church, popular, well, Gothic cathedrals that have an element of the Tudor in them as well. Let's take a look at the inside, and this just gives you an example of the inside of a Gothic cathedral as compared to a Gothic Tudor cathedral. This is you see emphasis of the wood. We still have some of the high arched beams. We'll talk about the windows, but basically the structure is there with a twist. Our windows in our church are very much a traditional part of the traditions of the church and of the church art. The style of the cathedral, as I've said, is late English Gothic style, known as Tudor Gothic. In our windows, our Tudor Gothic windows, they have a depressed arch. I'll put this down where I can see it. Okay, this is the depressed arch. I don't know whether you can tell it or not. Let's see if I can use my pointer here. Right in here. It's up in this area, okay? But it's a depressed arch. That hollow pointed arch of the late Tudor Gothic style, there also style is known as a perpendicular style, which is the straight up style, which is it's really horizontal and vertical right angles. The Tudor Gothic windows are architecturally very much part of the tradition. These are very much part of the tradition of English medieval art. And thus, these particular windows that we're looking at right now and throughout our cathedral connect us here in North Florida to the Anglican communion and to the history of the Episcopalian and Anglican churches, all the way back to the Middle Ages. St. John's Parish, the first St. John's Parish, was built, well, I guess the first church was around 1834, all right? And then there was a terrible, and all it had a concrete foundation, board and batten, iron stoves, and back with windows that opened with iron hinges. There was no stained glass. It burned. Then the new one was built in 1851, the one that you're looking at right here. This was built in 1851. Now, let me get rid of this. There we go. Okay, this one was built in 1851, and the next one burned as well. I'm having trouble with the laser pointer. And our church today, this is 1901 fire in Jacksonville was awful. And it burned the entire city down, literally. And this is what it looked like. I mean, there was just loss of life. This particular, our church was the result of this in May. And the church that was kind of, it was red brick, it was Romanesque, it was designed by Potter. And we did have, so far, we have had really good luck with this one. This is Indiana limestone, 110 years, and it's still here. So thank you, Lord. Our windows, just an overview. 90% of all of our windows bear both painted and stained glass application. 90%. Okay. Most windows bear lead, earning, as opposed to zinc or other newer products. The coming chapel, our beautiful coming chapel is different. A this there was a wonderful canon, uh, Dixon Bridgers, and he acquired much of the information that I'm using. He acquired from Cathedral archive writers, and he put a lot of this together. A lot of the windows that are designed along the lines of the 14th century French patterns, and a majority of them were built by the George Payne Studios. Now, George Payne came over from England, um, during the Gothic revival period, and moved to America and established this studio. And it was a family studio, just like all of the major stained glass studios were started by a family and then were carried on to the generation. Interestingly, the cost of the 20 some odd stained glass windows that we have were installed did not total $100,000. Found in a letter from George Payne in 1955. 50 years later, when the windows were appraised to satisfy insurance adjustments, the value was 1.4 million. So today, I am sure they will be worth a lot more than that. Each of the windows that we have in our church bear a biblical story, or they bear several stories, or a combination or a series of religious pictograms, ciphers, and frequently the honoree is identified with the birth and the death dates noted in the lead script at the bottom. It was his or her family who eventually wrote the check and paid for everything. The signature of each of these windows was that it was created to the glory of God in memory of blank, 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 someone. The honorees. A majority of the high-profile honorees were active leaders in Jacksonville, the state, the diocese, or the nation. Some were not so high-profile communicants during their lifetime, and they and their families may have been on the road to historical obscurity had they not been included among the select few in presentations such as this one. It was discovered that in most instances, and I'll see if I can get this. Oh gosh, I wish. Hang on a minute. This thing is just driving me crazy. Okay, see if I could do this. Yeah. All right, let me get the. Okay, as you can see through these windows, some of the names are on them. The Weeds family were donors. Okay. They may have lived next door to each other. They served on the vestry together. They served on the altar guild together. They were in business with each other. They socialized with each other, or they married into each other's families. A few generations apart, in the same pew, they prayed the prayer of humble access, and they knelt to each other at the rails. When the windows were installed in St. John's, they were not the first stained glass windows in Jacksonville. The Trinity Methodist Episcopals were the first, followed by the Bethel Baptist Memorial, and we were a close third. So we're going to start our walk through the church with the Howell entrance, and this Howell entrance is on Market Street exit. These windows, there are two windows there, and they were given by the Howell family. And I wanted to start here, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one because this just kind of talks about what stained glass windows are made to do from the beginning, from the Middle Ages on, and they're still doing it today. The Howells gave this particular windows, these two windows, and I think one more, they were in 1972. And these were windows were made by the Payne Stained Glass Associates of Patterson, New Jersey. They were donated by Mr. and Mrs. Marshall Howell of Jacksonville as a memorial to their parents. The window on the west side of the entrance depicts the early events significant to the St. John's Cathedral. And I'm going to try to do this. Let's see if it'll work. Yes, it will. Bring this up a little bit so that you can see it a little bit closer. Historians have determined that the first prayer book and the first prayer service was held by Sir Francis Drake's chaplain in 1579 in San Francisco Bay, although others surmise that the churches could have been held a year earlier in Hudson Bay. It's entirely possible that the first Anglican service held in the present territorial limits of the United States was held in Florida by and this was a historian Robinson, by a pirateer called John Hawkins. He was an Elizabethan sea captain, and he probably probably had the morning offices to be read during his visit with the Huguenot colony at Fort Caroline. Very interesting story about this fellow Hawkins. He was a privateer. If this is Hawkins, now we don't know. This can either be a replicant of Hawkins or it could be Francis Drake, either one. But we do know that the services were held at Fort Caroline, and he did it. In fact, as a privateer, he would sell this area around here, taking whatever he could to take back to England and distributing things. The Huguenots were starving at Fort Caroline, and he appeared and was able to keep them and rein them in and give them supplies. Bless their hearts, though, as soon as he left, Menendez came and wiped them all out. This is the story, and it's this beautiful, and it tells a lot of things. It tells the beginning of the church here, the first reading of the official prayer book. As you can see in the background, a small family. This could be Fort Caroline. It could be parish members. It could be the first members of St. John's. And then you see, as I showed you the picture before of the church, the Romanesque church that burned. And this is an emblem of the phoenix, the bird that rises, burns up and then rises from the ashes. And then we see the new cathedral at the top with our beautiful emblem. So this is an absolute glorious story just in one panel of the creation of our church as we know it today. The next panel that is in the same area tells another story. This story is the story of the 5 parishes that were, this is what they call a tree of Jesse. And there's some of you I'm not going to go into the details of a tree of Jesse, but look it up, especially during Christmas season. Our church honors the tree of Jesse. This is the birth, the branches tell the history and how Christ was his ancestry. It's kind of a genealogical tree. Well, this is a genealogical tree as well, because this is the tree of Jesse, and on this window, it commemorates the 5 early mission churches that were founded by members of the St. John's Parish. Their names are listed, St. Andrew's, as well as their emblem. St. Andrew was, in legend has it, did not want to be crucified as on the cross that Christ was crucified on, one similar to it, but one that was an inverted cross. And this is his symbol. The symbol of St. Mark, the apostle Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, second book of the Bible. This is the line, and you always see Mark with wings, and usually the line with wings has its foot on the Bible. Good Shepherd, another one of the parishes, the Lamb of Christ and the staff of leading us into salvation. This one is St. Andrew's, I'm sorry, St. Stephen's. St. Stephen's, this that looks like mud is really, I'm sure, rocks, or because St. Stephen was the martyr, and the three rocks that were thrown to kill him, literally. This is St. John's, which is us, which is of course the eagle looking up to the sky and to the light, and with one claw or foot on the Bible and surrounded by the light of God. Now, this is an interesting one, and I've done some research on St. Mary's. St. Mary's emblem was the Eucharist, and usually it is with wheat, grapes of this nature. The only thing that I can tell is perhaps that this is wheat growing. So once more, we have in the entrance another story. So you walk into that entrance, and if you're looking, you get the full scope right there in two windows of our church. Moving right along. This is the south door. This is, you walk back through the narthex, and you turn around and you look up over the door. And this is over the south doors, and this connects the Howell entrance that we just were with to the cathedral. And this is a memorial to Hudnall, and Harold Dupree, and I think it's Bornatal. It was given by their daughter. It's a French name, and I'm sure it's Huguenot. You know, there's a big Huguenot influence in the South. I just came back from a trip to Charleston, South Carolina, where there is a it's like a temple in a way, a gathering that only Huguenot men can go to if your ancestors of the Huguenots. We still find this influence and names on our local rolls in the Episcopal Church. Next is the rest window, and this is the beautiful rose window. And this massive, it's over our, this was in the West Wall, and it was designed by Franz Borgia Mayer of Munich, Germany in 1907. This was another hugely respected stained glass company in Germany. In fact, this company basically did hundreds and hundreds of windows all over the world. This one was done for us in 1907. They had just opened up a office in New York City, and I'm sure this came from it. But I want you to take a look, because this is just magnificent. It's not very often we can get up close and personally. Notice the colors, and I do want to, the gold signifying the sun. The rose windows, of course, are circular. Each of the little cherubs, let me pull up one if you can see it, that are just delightful. And there's something else I want to mention. The rose is the circle of life, as we all know from the Lion King. But yeah, the Christians had the circle of life before Disney, all right? Notice this. This is the mother and the baby, okay? And Christ is pretty large, right? He's sitting on her lap. And symbolically, when you see a Madonna with the child sitting on her lap, it's in reference to wisdom. This child, she is the one that is importing wisdom. He is taking it, he is giving it back in her. And if you were standing there and then you turn around and you look all the way back to the nave, to the choir, you'll see the next rose window with Christ giving the symbol of peace. So these two beautiful rose windows are looking directly on them. Notice it's surrounded by the church itself. Notice the use of the colors, everyone. This is what Mayer was noted for. Mayer was noted for it in his design and his artist design, as well as Payne, is the beautiful way that they were able to use this opalescent, and Tiffany as well. It was a new thing right around the 1900s, and it was just exploding in the United States and literally, all over the world. Beautiful. This transom window above the great west doors is called the Works of Man. And I want you to look at how these are formed. And notice once again the style and the tracery. Each hand, the praying hands, the hands that are holding the cross, the praising hands, the working, the giving hands. When I've often thought that as Kate ought to have everybody turn around and look at these when we're doing the offertory, because it's so symbolic of what we should be doing with our hands as far as Christians are concerned. This was a Payne design in 1934, offered by the Gilks family as a memorial to their grandmother, who was an early parish. She was and the widow of the infamous third rector, and I haven't looked him up, but his name was Isaac Stewart, and it says infamous. I will have to look that up. Then we come to the next and probably the most expensive window and one of the most beautiful windows in our church. This is our Tiffany window. And it's the oldest window in the cathedral. It was designed and built by the Tiffany Studios in New York. From uh, our last part two, we talked a lot about Tiffany and how these windows were made and the studio that it was. This is really, you artists, Tiffany stained glass people could walk in and tell that this was a Tiffany window with lots of characteristics. I would like to point out, this is one that you will see a lot in Tiffany construction, is the floral designs and the shape. And I'm really interested in how how the artist formulated Christ. Of course, the earth, the green is always a note of earthiness, the red robe of honor and richness, the halo around heavenly light. But if you'll notice that he's picked up the colors, the light all the way through, even down into the bottom row where the register is. And these is usually, and this is what they call the register down here, and you can read the memorials. But this is probably one of the most beautiful windows in the world. If you get to Winter Haven, you need to tour and look at the Tiffany studio there, and you will see a lot of the same characteristics in the work there that you see in this particular piece. It's absolutely beautiful. The next window that we're going to look at is the window to is referred to the priestly window or the Last Supper. It's a gift to the glory of God and a memorial to Charles Benedict. And notice the perpendicular style. This is a classic example of Tudor, a Gothic Tudor style. This one, the Last Supper, you see Judas, you can, with his money on you can tell the story. Looking at this, you can tell the story. Christ with the blessings, his two faithful uh, apostles next to him. Notice the wheat, the grapes, a sign of the Eucharist, the story, and notice the little bits of the cross and what is to happen that are symbolic throughout this. Once again, notice the color in these windows, the absolute beautiful blues that represent heavenly bodies, the halos. And this artist has chosen to do halos out of different colors, which is very interesting to me. The next window that we're looking at, this is the nativity window. You could spend like 2 hours just on this one window looking at it. The window, it's the closest to the crossing and the nativity. It was given by the church vestry in 1936, and it was designed by the Payne Spear Studio. And it's in memorial to William Boers Drew and Francis Hunt Drew, who were longtime members and communicants of the St. John's Church. But we're going to look at the story here. that they depicted. And we'll go down and look at something else in a minute. In the center, we see the Christ child, the wise men, but there's other stories that are surrounding this. There's stories of Christ as a child. The stories here he is learning the elders when he was lost. On this segment over here, Bethlehem, this one, the shepherds. So Christ's story, his early story, is not only represented in this window, just the birth, but other things happening. Well, now let's take a look down here. These are the saints, St. George and the dragon. You see the symbol of the dragon, the story of St. George and the dragon. St. Roch. I knew nothing about St. Roch, looking him up, and he was a saint for pilgrims that were doing pilgrimages in the Middle Ages. Then in the center, you see purity, holding the dove, faith, the cross, and the candle. Okay, I'm sorry, the urn. Love, represented with a mother with a baby. And this is Saint Lawrence. Saint Lawrence, that is a saint who was a martyr and was tortured for his faith by burning. And instead, they strapped him and burned him, and his resilience. And he says, "I'm not done. Turn me over on the other side." That's an old legend. And here's this is part of the grill. And then this is Saint Loggins, who was a warrior. He was the one that looked at the foot of Christ and said, "Truly, this is the Son of God." Stories of our faith represented in these windows. The next window that we're going to look at, this is the baptismal window. And it was donated by the Warner family. There is another named honoree, that of baby Natalie. And that reverence is the only infant appearing as a named honoree in any of our churches, any of the windows. But let's take a closer look at this one. Okay. Once again, the baptism. You can tell the story, the dove coming. And the story surrounding Christ as he matures in his ministry through the baptism. This one is the one you can see the temptation, the devil. This one over here, the carpenter side, learning to be a carpenter, working with his father. This one is the story when he was left by his parents. Remember, they couldn't find him, and he was giving lessons and talking about the scripture. Down at the bottom in the register, we see the apostles, St. John, James, Matthew, and with their particular symbols that go along with them. This window is called the healing window. To me, it's one of the most beautiful. I want you to look at what this artist did with red. I want you to look at how he emphasized red. That's another thing as you look at these windows, not necessarily notice what the stories are, but what they did with the space, what they did with the geometric lines, what they did with color, what they did with shapes, and what they used with repeated patterns, or all of the artistic value is here. All of the things that we have, the balance. Notice how they balance this window. they ballot on this side, and this side is away with the scrolls. Notice the use that follows your, watch your eye. If you start with the red and you move it here, 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 and here. Notice what your eye does when you notice the blue over to here. The healing window. This is showing Christ's, all of the different things that Christ did to heal. And it's, to me, the lame, the blind, giving, feeding, Good Samaritan. Okay. So when we sit in church on Sunday morning, we have a reference to the ministry that we should be doing as well. Coming up to the next window. This is what is called the garden window. And this is, pull this one down. This is the agony in the garden. This was designed again by the Payne Studios in 1955 as a commemorative to Dr. Edward McCready. Once again, I want you to look at this. Christ in the garden praying. Over to the side, the story of what's going to happen. Arms bound. The story of Judas betraying him. He went to the garden to pray. The story there in pictures of the apostles sleeping. And once again, look at how the color, look how design is used. Here you see the red of Christ's robes reflected in the angel's wings. You see the blue and the black, but blue is carried over through the next channels. It's absolutely beautiful works of art. And what they have done with the tracery, the outlining, how they have used that to outline the folds in the stained glass. At the bottom, these St. Luke, and the honoree of this window was a physician. So St. Luke stands in the center, but his wife also wanted women, as I read in different things, honored as well. So you have Ruth, Mary holding the lily of purity. You have Mary and Martha, and the last two. This is the resurrection window. And the story of the resurrection unfolds. Christ coming into Jerusalem, nailed to the cross, saying, I am the cross. Thomas doubting him, sticking his fingers in his side. Below are saints that will be with him in the resurrection. St. Augustine. These are patron saints. St. Augustine was the founder of a bishop of Hippo. He was a writer. St. Patrick was a patron saint of Ireland. St. Aidan was an Irish missionary, and he has been proposed to be, I don't think it'll ever happen, but proposed to be the saint of the United Kingdom because he had his foot in every country during missionary work. Saint Paul, as we know, which you can see was with the sword, that is one of his symbols. Saint Columba. Saint Columba was the patron saint, I would think, of Scotland. And he was also built monasteries all over. Saint David was a monk, and a story of him. He's the patron saint of Wales. And then you have on the end Saint Boniface, who was the apostles. The Pope said Germany, the monks in Germany and the religion in Germany in the 700s is falling apart. I need someone to go and straighten them out. And Saint Boniface did. He went into Germany and became patron saint of Germany. This is another view of that. And I want you to look at the glorious colors, because everything, the color in this window and the blues and the golds focus you, and the reds pull your eye right to the center. And then it fans you out to look at the apostles and the angels as they this is the ascension window as Christ ascends into the heavens. And notice the use of how, and this to me is just phenomenal. I can't wait to get up and look at it again. I want you to look at the strokes in the glass, the painting in the glass of the blues here. Notice here. Notice here. There is movement in this movement in this glass. Movement. Here's the clouds. He's in the clouds. And this artist, this stained glass artist, was able to share that movement, just but how he painted that particular color. You get that. And then by utilizing this up here, he extends that color all the way up into the next window to give you that feeling of rising. Everything in that window, if you will look at it, your eye is just, you come in and it's just pulled right up. A wonderful thing for all of us on Easter Sunday to go and look at this particular window and share in it. Notice how he peppered the greens throughout, the earth tones, down here with the lilies. Everything in this window is just focusing you on the purity and the resurrection of life. This is an interesting window too. This is on the transept, and it's outside. And this is a memorial to Raymond Jameson. Somebody, it's not a saint. It's not he's not a figure of high importance, an everyday Joe. Mrs. Jameson served as the parish secretary for many years. She was born with one hand, and this window was bequeathed in 1956 for her husband. I think we can tell a little bit about her husband from looking at that. Let me go back. I'm sorry. I think we can tell a little bit about her husband from looking at that, just by the symbol of the Navy, probably portion on the sea a lot. Perhaps he was a father. I'm not too certain. Someone who is in the military can tell me this, and this I know is bred in some way. But this is what I said at the beginning about our cathedral, that everyone, all walks of life, are represented in these marvelous stained glass windows. This is the east wall of the choir, and this is the deepest part of the cathedral. And it's behind the altar. This is where the bishop's chair and the rood screen is. It holds 8 lancets, and it's a big window, and it tells a big story. The donor was the congregation to honor all the previous rectors and other clergy who served at St. John's. And all of these images or cartoons that are shown with a book and pen are the gospelers. So this is a beautiful, there, I don't have much. I think Kate did some, I'm going to pull it up so that you can see it, but it's absolutely gorgeous. Once again, let me call your attention to the color and design. The geometric feel of this whole window just pulls you in to the stories of these people who absolutely, this was given to by Winfred Greiner, and she later years she lived in the Cathedral Towers, and the designer was the Willett Company. The Willett Company, I think, also designed, maybe not, they're another huge stained glass company. And now we get to my favorite that I love looking at. I hope everyone get it. Yeah, this is behind the windows. Okay. This is my favorite. This is what I enjoy looking at every single Sunday. This is the rose window. And I'm going to enlarge it and let you take a look at this beautiful, beautiful window. Once again, the rose windows were round in shape. They were all the cathedrals, the big cathedrals have them. What I love about this, and a lot of times the rose windows are really complicated. They're really designed. They've got lots of stuff in them. What I love about our window is it's not. It's just the simplistic thing of Christ holding the world, giving us a blessing. And notice the use, the beams coming out. Over here is his blessing. And the dove. And down you see just the Garner Weed, who were the people who paid for this. He was a bishop, and the family. This was given to him as he was the 3rd Episcopal Bishop of Florida, and this was given by him, by his wife.
It's a beautiful rainbow behind him.
Oh, God. Yes, Patrick, absolutely. And then I just can't leave this discussion without, this is another thing that we do so, is done so well in the church. These are the bishops that we don't have the very first one, but we have 4 of them. These are the bishop of the church. This was the the first one was Rutledge.
Todd F. Young.
Yeah, Rutledge. This one is over here is Bishop Young. And those of you that have been following, Catherine, if I'm not wrong, this is the one that started the Spires in the Sun book. I mean, he Bishop Young of Florida was he was the 2nd bishop, and
Correct.
he did much of the work in planning the new missions in Florida. The next one, just very, very briefly, this is the 3rd bishop. This was Garner Weed. He's traveled. He did a lot of traveling through the Episcopal. He was on the road as much as 8 weeks at a time. He was served with the Good Shepherd. He was a rector. He says, perhaps the American church has never before known a more approachable bishop, they said of him when he retired. This is, did you say that Johann or Jan? I'm not certain how you said that. Father, this was under his leadership, missions became parishes. There were in 10 years and 16 new missions were organized. It should be evident to all, it was said of him, that the diocese has definitely stepped forward during the past 3 years. He was praised as the Swanee guardian angel. And then this is Reverend West, Hamilton West. He was the 5th Bishop of Florida, and his clergy staff grew from 58 to 74 in 1970. He did a lot. He gave up 18 of its clergy, 9 of its parishes, and 13 of its missions to help create a new diocese.
Mm.
So these men were absolutely powerhouses in the Florida establishment of churches in the Florida diocese. Okay, my friends, we come to the end of this little journey. And I really, I could have spent 2 hours on each of especially the nativity one. We are absolutely so blessed to have every Sunday to worship in this glorious place. But it just taught me something doing this. There is a lot of times when you sit in a place, you feel something, or and we go to feel something. We go to be closer to God. We go to have some kind of communion in some way with Him and us. It needs a two-way street. And I think this is one way, these beautiful windows in the church. So perhaps all of you come a little early or stay a little late and meander around these gorgeous windows and tell the story to yourself. Look at these windows and tell the story to yourself. Amen and amen. Any comments, questions before we leave?
Sandy,
Thank you so much.
oh, I'm so sorry. Sandy, I've got to run. I just want to thank you. You have done such a lovely job, and we have learned so much. And my goodness, I can't imagine going into such detail about these lovely windows. And I just want to thank you. That it's a wonderful program you've given us, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank
And I
you.
have to go. I'm so sorry. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Wonderful, Sandy.
Any questions, comments? All right.
Beautiful.
I say
Thank you
amen to
so
what
much for the
Susan
whole
said.
series.
Yes.
All of your research is obvious and much appreciated.
Well, we're going to take this research for those of you that are still with us, and I've spoken to Kate about it to create some kind of printed document so that we can utilize, utilize it. We need it. We need to read about these people. We need to know about the St. Rocks, and we need to know about the Howells and this type of thing. This is not part of our church history, but I think it's just part of our religion. So we're going to work on it. So y'all have a wonderful week. God bless.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy.
Lovely, Sandy.
Yes.
Thank you.